The sharp clatter of heels on polished marble silenced the restaurant before the woman even appeared. Heads turned, whispers tapered off, and in the expectant hush of Boston's elite, Victoria Hamilton glided into view. At 43, she was the kind of woman people both admired and feared. Her beauty pristine, her presence commanding, her arrogance woven into every step like an invisible cloak. The Magda D straightened as though a soldier saluting a queen. His hand trembled slightly as he reached to pull back her chair. "Mrs. Hamilton, always an honor," he murmured, his forehead already damp with nervous sweat. She did not even look at him fully. "The tablecloth has a wrinkle," she said. Her voice was silk-threaded with steel. "Fix it." The staff scrambled as if the wrinkle in the cloth were a matter of life or death. A busboy snatched it away while another rushed to replace it. Fresh flowers appeared within moments. The lighting above her table adjusted with desperate precision. Victoria Hamilton was used to this orchestration. She expected it. The city belonged to her husband, Carter Hamilton, a tech magnate whose billions kept skyscrapers rising and politicians friendly. But the social sphere, the dinner parties, the charity galas, the whispered networks of power, those belonged to Victoria. She wielded fear as though it were a jeweled scepter. One cold glance could dismantle reputations. One sharp word could undo careers. 3 tables away, Sarah Miller sat stiffly, feeling out of place amid the glitter of wealth. Her husband, David, leaned down to help their daughter Emily adjust in her wheelchair. Emily's legs, still fragile from the accident 3 years ago, rested neatly in braces. But it was her eyes, bright, quick, and unafraid, that drew strangers' attention. Today was supposed to be a celebration. Emily had just won her school's science competition, astonishing her teachers with the solar-powered model she'd built from scraps. They couldn't afford dinners like this often, but David insisted this victory deserved something special. "Mom," Emily whispered, catching the way the entire restaurant shifted like tides around the woman in the corner. "Why is everyone so quiet?" Sarah followed her gaze. "That's Mrs. Hamilton," she said gently. "She owns half the buildings downtown." Emily tilted her head. "She doesn't own the air we breathe," she said simply, the words carrying the wisdom of someone who had learned what really mattered when the rest of life had been stripped away. Sarah blinked, stunned by her daughter's matter-of-fact truth. The performance around Victoria continued. A young server, no more than 19, tried to steady her hand as she poured water. The crystal glass filled to the rim, but a few drops spilled down the side. Victoria's lips curved into a perfect sneer. "Incompetent." She muttered loudly enough for the whole restaurant to hear. "Is this what passes for service now?" The server's face burned crimson. "I'm so sorry, Mrs. Hamilton. I'll bring you a fresh." "Don't bother." Victoria cut her off, her tone sharp as glass. "Send someone competent to take my order." Emily's small hands gripped the armrest of her chair, her face flushed with indignation, her young mind unable to reconcile such cruelty in someone who seemed to have everything. She had been taught kindness in hospital wards, taught patience in recovery rooms, taught to value every act of gentleness, because she knew what it meant to depend on others. To see a woman dismiss another human being so easily, it ignited something in her. When Victoria's phone rang, she rose and stepped toward the entrance, her voice slicing the air with clipped instructions about some gala. Emily's heart beat faster. This was her chance. "I need to use the restroom," she announced. Her mother looked up quickly. "Want me to take you?" "No thanks, Mom. I can do it." Her voice carried the firm determination that had become her armor. She wheeled herself forward, each push steady, purposeful. The room was hushed as always, but now eyes followed her too. The girl in the chair moving toward the storm. Victoria ended her call and turned, nearly colliding with Emily's wheelchair. "What on earth?" Victoria looked down, irritation flashing across her perfect features. "Child, move aside." Emily's head lifted, her gaze unflinching. "My name is Emily, not child, and you made that server cry." The words fell into the silence like stones into water, rippling outward. A few diners shifted uncomfortably, others leaned forward. "Waiting?" Victoria blinked, startled. "Excuse me. You have beautiful clothes and jewelry," Emily continued, her voice calm, steady, unwavering. "But you weren't being beautiful on the inside. My mom says that's the part that matters." Gasps whispered across the tables. Someone stifled a laugh. The Magda D froze mid-step, and for the first time anyone in Boston could remember, Victoria Hamilton's carefully composed facade cracked. Her face flushed crimson, her eyes flickering not with fury, but something else, something unguarded and fragile. "You don't know who I am," she finally managed. Though her voice lacked its usual authority, Emily smiled, small but piercing. "I do. You're someone who can afford anything except being nice." The restaurant held its breath. The Queen of Boston had been undone, not by rivals or scandals, but by the quiet truth of a little girl in a wheelchair. And in that moment, something shifted, something that would unravel far more than Victoria's evening. The city lights flickered against the glass walls of Hamilton Tower that evening, glowing like a monument to wealth and power. Inside her penthouse suite, Victoria Hamilton stood by the window, her reflection a portrait of cold elegance. Yet her hands would not stop trembling. She had faced senators, CEOs, and critics without faltering. But the memory of that child's eyes, clear, steady, unafraid, clung to her like a shadow she could not shake off. "Dinner is ready, Mum," the housekeeper said quietly, placing a silver tray on the dining table. Victoria did not respond. She was too busy replaying the moment when Emily Miller's voice had cut through the silence of Luminous, stripping away her armor in front of Boston's elite. For the first time in decades, she had been made to look small, ridiculous, and, worst of all, it had been true. Her phone buzzed again, another call from the charity committee. She almost ignored it, but then she remembered the gala was 2 nights away, the one event where she would stand before the press and the city's most powerful. She forced her voice steady, answering with her usual icy poise. "Yes, everything will proceed as planned," she said, though her chest felt tight. As she hung up, her reflection seemed to sneer back at her, reminding her of the words she had tried to bury. "You weren't beautiful on the inside." Across town, the Millers returned to their modest home, a small house with peeling paint, but warmth in every corner. Emily's wheelchair rolled softly over the wooden floors as she carried her science trophy to her bedroom shelf. Her parents watched her with pride, though Sarah's brow furrowed. "You were very brave today, sweetheart," she said carefully, "but you should be careful. Mrs. Hamilton is a powerful woman." Emily looked up with that stubborn glint her teachers knew so well. "Powerful isn't the same as right," she said. "If people are afraid to tell her the truth, then she'll never change." David crouched beside her, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "You've got more courage than most adults I know," he whispered, and he meant it. He had seen her fight through pain, through endless physical therapy sessions, never once giving up. Emily wasn't just brave, she was unbreakable. But the world beyond their cozy home had already begun to stir. By morning, whispers spread across Boston's social circles. Someone had recorded the exchange at Luminous. A shaky phone video of Emily confronting Victoria had surfaced online. Within hours, it went viral. Headlines bloomed across blogs and gossip sites. Queen of Boston silenced. By 8-year-old in wheelchair, Victoria Hamilton's cruelty exposed. Comments poured in, praising Emily's courage, while mocking Victoria's arrogance. At Hamilton Tower, Victoria's fury burned like wildfire. She paced her marble floors, every headline another knife twisting in her chest. She had built her empire on fear and flawless control, and now a child had reduced her to a spectacle. Carter Hamilton, her husband, finally spoke up from his armchair, his voice heavy with disapproval. "You brought this on yourself, Victoria. People don't fear you anymore, they're laughing." She spun on him, eyes blazing. "Do you think I'll let a crippled child ruin me?" The word left her lips before she realized the venom in it. Carter's face hardened. "Careful," he said, standing now. "That crippled child has more grace than you've shown in years." He walked out, leaving her alone with her rage and something else, guilt. The word had slipped out too easily, too cruelly, and in her heart she felt the echo of her own childhood. The days when she had once been mocked for weakness, for poverty, for something she could not control. The city watched and waited. The gala loomed, a battlefield where reputations could be destroyed or restored. Victoria rehearsed her smile in the mirror, but cracks showed through. She needed to crush the story before it spread further. Her lawyers drafted letters, her staff whispered about strategies, yet deep inside, she knew the truth. No legal threat could erase the words of a child who had seen through her mask. Meanwhile, Emily lay awake in her small bedroom, staring at the shadows on the ceiling. She didn't regret speaking up, but she sensed this wasn't over. Something bigger was unfolding, something she couldn't yet name. Her mother checked on her, brushing a kiss against her forehead. Sleep, sweetheart. You've done enough. But Emily knew she hadn't. She had touched a nerve in the woman everyone feared, and she could feel it in her bones. Victoria. Hamilton would not forget. The battle between them had only just begun, and the next encounter would not take place in the quiet corners of a restaurant. It would be on a stage, under lights, with the whole city watching. And somewhere deep inside Victoria, past the arrogance and the rage, an old wound had been torn open, a secret she had spent her life burying. A secret that, if revealed, would shatter everything she had built. Asterisk, the city was alive with whispers. By the third morning after the confrontation, Victoria Hamilton's name was no longer spoken with awe, but with ridicule. Socialites, once eager to orbit her sphere, now clinked glasses at brunches and murmured about the viral video. Screens across Boston replayed the grainy footage of Emily Miller in her wheelchair. Her small, but firm voice piercing through the silence of luminous, "You weren't beautiful on the inside." Each repetition stripped another layer off Victoria's carefully constructed empire. Inside Hamilton Tower, the walls felt closer than ever. Victoria stood in her private study, where floor-to-ceiling shelves displayed rare books and artifacts, collected on travels meant to prove her superiority. But today, those relics mocked her. She threw her phone across the room, the screen shattering against the marble floor. A message from a former friend had set her off. "I always admired you, but maybe it's time you show some humility." Humility. The word burned worse than fire. Carter Hamilton, calm but tired, entered quietly. "You're losing ground, Victoria. Every outlet is picking this up. It's not just gossip, it's news now. That child is being called a hero." His voice carried a warning, but also something deeper, disappointment. Victoria turned on him, her eyes sharp. "And you're enjoying this, aren't you? You've always wanted to see me brought down." Carter didn't flinch. "No, I wanted to see you human again. But you buried that part of yourself so deep. I wonder if it even exists anymore." He left her to the echo of those words, and for the first time in years, Victoria felt the sting of being abandoned, not by society, but by the one man who knew her best. Across town, the Miller household had been transformed. Reporters camped outside their modest home. Neighbors dropped off flowers and cards for Emily, and strangers sent messages of admiration. Sarah tried to shield her daughter from the chaos, but Emily sensed the weight of it. She read the headlines on her father's phone, her brow furrowed. "I didn't mean to embarrass her," she whispered one evening, her voice tainted with guilt. "I just wanted her to stop being mean." David knelt beside her, steadying his hand on her wheelchair. "Emily, sometimes the truth is louder than we expect. You didn't embarrass her, you reminded everyone what kindness should look like. That scares people like her." Still, Emily couldn't shake the image of Victoria's face. The way it had cracked for just a moment, revealing something raw. There had been pain there, not just arrogance. Emily's young mind, sharp with empathy, wondered what secret the woman carried that made her so cruel. Meanwhile, Boston's elite prepared for the Hamilton Foundation Gala, a glittering event meant to showcase Victoria's influence. But instead of excitement, anticipation brimmed with tension. Would Victoria appear? Would she face the whispers head-on, or would she crumble under the weight of her tarnished image? Invitations suddenly felt like tickets to a public execution, or perhaps a resurrection. On the eve of the gala, a new story broke. A journalist had unearthed fragments of Victoria's past, details she had spent a lifetime burying. Old medical records hinted at years of childhood illness. School records revealed long absences. Neighbors from her youth whispered about a girl who once walked with braces, who was mocked for her weakness, who grew up in poverty before climbing her way into wealth. The picture painted was not of a queen, but of a girl who had once known humiliation far worse than spilled water at a restaurant. The revelation spread like wildfire. Victoria's critics sharpened their knives, calling her a hypocrite. Her defenders urged compassion, saying perhaps her cruelty was a mask for old scars. But for Victoria, the exposure was unbearable. Alone in her penthouse that night, she stared at an old photo she had kept hidden for decades, herself as a child, pale and thin, her legs bound in braces. She had sworn no one would ever see her weakness again. Now the world knew. The gala night arrived like a storm gathering over the city. Limousines pulled up outside the glass doors of the Hamilton Foundation, cameras flashing, journalists shouting questions. "Mrs. Hamilton, what do you say to the girl who called you heartless? Is it true you were once paralyzed yourself?" The crowd's energy was electric. charged with the hunger for blood or redemption. Inside, Victoria stood before the mirror, her gown flawless, her diamonds glittering like armor. But beneath the perfection, her chest tightened. The girl in the photo haunted her reflection, staring back with sad, unguarded eyes, and worse, she heard Emily's voice again, echoing in her mind. You weren't beautiful on the inside. And somewhere, across town, Emily sat in her wheelchair watching the coverage on television, unaware that the battle she had sparked was about to reach its climax in a ballroom of power, lights, and secrets. The Queen of Boston was about to step onto the stage, but this time, she wouldn't be the only one holding the city's attention. The ballroom of the Hamilton Foundation gleamed like a palace. Chandeliers bathed the gilded walls in golden light, the polished floor reflecting the glitter of jewels and tailored gowns. Every elite figure in Boston society was present, each of them dressed in perfection, their smiles thinly stretched over anticipation. They had not come to honor charity tonight. They had come for spectacle. Rumor had painted Victoria Hamilton's fall as imminent, and people who once bowed to her were now ready to feast on her humiliation. Victoria stood behind the velvet curtain that concealed the stage. Her gown shimmered with silver threads, her diamonds catching every sliver of light. On the outside, she was a vision of command, flawless and untouchable. Inside, however, her chest tightened with every breath. The words of the journalist still echoed in her ears. Is it true you once wore leg braces? Did you hide your past to build this image? Her fist clenched at her sides, nails digging into her palms. Secrets she had buried in dust and shame were now paraded in headlines. Her assistant leaned in nervously. Mrs. Hamilton, they're waiting. Shall I be silent? Victoria hissed, but her voice lacked its usual precision. It shook, if only slightly. She hated herself for it. The curtains parted, and she stepped forward. 1,000 eyes turned as one. Applause filled the ballroom, but it was not admiration, it was ritual, obligatory. Beneath the claps lurked whispers, the kind that cut deeper than silence. Victoria smiled, but the corners of her mouth wavered. Ladies and gentlemen, she began, her voice echoing through the room. Tonight we gather not for gossip, not for petty distractions, but for purpose. The Hamilton Foundation. Her speech was crafted to reclaim control, to project authority. But as she spoke, something stirred in the crowd. People were not leaning forward in respect, they were exchanging glances, checking their phones. A ripple spread from the back of the room. Cameras shifted, necks craned, and then, through the grand doors, entered the Millers. Gasps whispered through the ballroom like wind across dry leaves. Sarah and David flanked their daughter's wheelchair, Emily sitting upright, her eyes wide, with innocence yet carrying a weight that stilled the air. She wore a simple dress, nothing compared to the wealth glittering around her, but she outshone them all. Every camera turned, every guest forgot Victoria's speech. Victoria froze on stage, her throat constricted, her carefully rehearsed lines dissolved. She had planned for reporters, for whispers, even for mockery, but not for her, not for the child who had dismantled her in the restaurant. Emily did not speak at first. She did not need to. The sight of her was enough. The audience, already divided, now leaned into a silent choice, the feared queen or the courageous child. Victoria's voice faltered. The Hamilton Foundation. She trailed off, swallowing hard. For the first time, the mask of dominance fractured in front of her empire. The silence was deafening. Then a journalist shouted from the side, Mrs. Hamilton, what do you say to the girl who called you heartless? Astor's flashes exploded. Victoria's composure shattered. She wanted to scream, to demand Emily be removed, to crush the moment under her heel, but her husband Carter stood in the front row, his gaze unyielding, arms crossed as if daring her to reveal the truth she had buried for decades. Emily's voice finally carried across the ballroom, clear and sharp. You can't build something good by making people afraid of you. The words fell heavy in the silence. It wasn't a child's plea, it was a verdict. The audience, Boston's finest, shifted uncomfortably. Some nodded, some whispered, but not one laughed at Victoria. Not this time. She gripped the podium so tightly her knuckles whitened, her heart pounded. In Emily's eyes, she saw herself a frail girl trapped in braces, mocked by classmates, pitied by neighbors. She had sworn she would never be weak again, and yet, this child had dragged that secret into the light without even knowing it. The room waited. What would Victoria Hamilton do? Admit the truth and be human for once, or wield the only weapon she had left, cruelty? Her lips parted, but before She could speak. A large screen behind her flickered to life. The foundation had prepared a video montage of her charity work, but the footage had been altered. Someone had leaked the viral video from the restaurant. The ballroom filled with the sight of Emily confronting her. Played larger than life. "You weren't beautiful on the inside." The audience gasped. Some covered their mouths. Others raised phones to record the moment. Victoria stumbled back from the podium, her facade crumbling under the weight of truth and humiliation. Her empire was slipping through her fingers, and Emily, sitting quietly in her chair, whispered to her parents, "She doesn't look scary anymore." The Queen of Boston had been dethroned, not by rivals or scandals, but by an 8-year-old with unshakable honesty. And in the wreckage of that moment, a storm of consequences began to rise, one that would tear open everything Victoria had fought to hide. The fallout from the gala was immediate and merciless. By dawn the next morning, every major paper, every blog, and every social feed was ablaze with headlines. Victoria Hamilton humiliated on stage. Child in wheelchair shatters Boston's queen. Secrets of the Hamilton Empire exposed. The footage of Emily's words projected across the gala screen. In front of the city's elite circulated like wildfire, stripped of her mystique. Victoria was no longer feared. She was mocked, pitied, dissected. Hamilton Tower, once a fortress of power, was now under siege. Protesters gathered outside, chanting against the arrogance of the elite. Employees whispered in corners. Business partners called Carter privately, expressing doubts about the foundation's reputation. Carter Hamilton, usually quiet and composed, now sat in the study staring at his wife, his disappointment etched deeper than words. "You could have told the truth," he said flatly. "You could have shown them who you really are." Victoria, pacing with her silk robe trailing behind her, snapped back. "Do you think they would care about truth? They wanted blood, and that child gave it to them. That child," Carter said sharply, rising to his feet, "reminded them of something you've forgotten: compassion. You think people fear makes you untouchable, but it's killing you." He slammed the door as he left. And for the first time in years, Victoria felt utterly alone. But the world wasn't finished with her. The morning broadcast didn't stop. At the restaurant video or the gala disaster, a new wave of revelations struck. Documents leaked, testimonies uncovered. Journalists dug deep into the Hamilton Foundation. Stories of inflated charity reports, funds that disappeared into shadow accounts, donations that never reached the causes they were meant for. And at the center of it all was Victoria's signature. The empire she had ruled through intimidation was crumbling, not from the outside, but from within. Her staff, terrified of going down with her, began leaking more information. One former aide, his voice disguised on an interview, said, "She ruled us with fear. People cried in bathrooms. But she was hiding something about her past she never wanted anyone to know." Meanwhile, Emily Miller became an unlikely symbol. News anchors spoke of her courage, her wisdom beyond years. Hashtags with her name trended across social media. Interviews poured in, though Sarah and David shielded her from most of them, wanting to protect her innocence. Emily herself didn't quite understand why the world was so captivated. She only knew that she had spoken the truth when no one else dared. One night, sitting at the kitchen table with her parents, Emily asked softly, "Why does Mrs. Hamilton act like that if she knows what it feels like to be hurt? Didn't someone once hurt her?" Sarah paused, stunned at her daughter's intuition. "Maybe," she said gently. "Sometimes people build walls so no one can hurt them again, but those walls can turn into cages." Emily thought for a moment and whispered, "I think she's still inside her cage." Across town, Victoria sat alone in her penthouse, scrolling through endless streams of commentary. For every cruel insult, there were whispers of sympathy, people asking if the rumors about her childhood illness were true. She hated that the world was prying, but what she hated more was the photo that had surfaced. Herself at age 9, pale and frail, braces strapped to her thin legs, eyes wide with the same vulnerability she now saw in Emily. She smashed the tablet against the wall, but the image was already carved into her mind. It was why she had clawed her way out of poverty, why she had vowed never to be weak again. But now the secret she had buried was rising, and Emily Miller innocent. Persistent Emily was the mirror she could not escape. The tension in Boston tightened like a noose. Investigators circled the Hamilton Foundation, allies deserted, and, in hushed whispers, society speculated not only about corruption, but about what Victoria Hamilton was hiding. So, desperately, and then came the letter. It arrived without a return address, slipped under the heavy double doors of her penthouse. The handwriting was uneven, almost childlike. Her hands trembled as she opened it. Inside, a single line. Do you remember the girl with the braces? She never left you. Her breath caught. She dropped the paper, staring into the silence of the room. For the first time since her downfall began, she felt something colder than humiliation, sharper than rage, fear. Because whoever had written that knew the truth she had spent her entire life burying, and the world was watching, waiting for her next move. The city had turned against her. What once felt like a kingdom had become a cage. Victoria Hamilton moved through her penthouse like a restless ghost, her phone buzzing constantly with calls from lawyers, reporters, and board members demanding answers. Each ring was another stone crushing her chest. She silenced them all. But silence did not bring peace. It brought the echo of that child's voice. You weren't beautiful on the inside. The letter lay on her desk. Its uneven handwriting burned into her mind. Do you remember the girl with the braces? She never left you. Victoria stared at it as if it were alive, pulsing with menace. Someone knew. Someone had seen through the fortress of diamonds and silk. She poured herself a glass of wine with a shaking hand, but the taste was bitter. For the first time in years, fear not power rolled her veins. Outside, the storm was building. The Attorney General had announced an investigation into the Hamilton Foundation's finances. Leaked files exposed millions siphoned into shell companies. Partners who once toasted her now issued public statements distancing themselves. Carter Hamilton, silent since the gala, packed a suitcase. His voice was flat as he stood by the door. I built this empire with my hands. You poisoned it with your pride. I can't stand beside you anymore. And then he left. Victoria had never been alone before. Not truly. The silence that followed his departure was suffocating. She pressed her palms against the cold glass of the window, staring down at the protesters below. Their signs cut deeper than any insult. Justice. For the people, not the powerful. Kindness is strength. Listen to Emily, Emily Miller. The name alone pierced Victoria like a blade. She was everywhere now, her face on news segments, her words quoted in headlines, her small act of courage rippling into a movement. Invitations flooded the Miller household from universities, charities, even television shows. Sarah and David guarded their daughter fiercely, but the world's hunger was insatiable. Emily's story was bigger than all of them. Yet Emily herself was uneasy. One night, after turning off the TV, she asked her mother, why does it feel like Mrs. Hamilton is still sad, even when people are angry at her? Sarah hesitated. Because sometimes the people who hurt others are the ones hurting most inside. Emily's gaze grew distant. She thought of the flicker she had seen in Victoria's eyes, that luminous, the crack in her armor, the trembling of her voice. I don't think she's evil, Emily whispered. I think she's scared. Meanwhile, the investigation grew. Teeth. Former employees testified about Victoria's cruelty, but also about her secrecy. One mentioned finding locked drawers in her office filled with medical records. Another spoke of nights when Victoria would vanish, unreachable for days, only to return sharper, colder. The press speculated wildly. Was she covering for someone, or hiding something of her own? The climax arrived when the Attorney General subpoenaed her to appear at a public hearing. The city buzzed with anticipation. This was not just about fraud. It was about watching the Queen of Boston stripped bare. On the day of the hearing, cameras lined the courthouse steps, protesters chanted. Supporters of Emily held banners with her words, printed in bold. You weren't beautiful on the inside. Victoria stepped out of her car, dressed in black, her diamonds gone. She looked smaller, without the armor of extravagance. Her heels clicked against the stone. But the sound no longer commanded silence, it provoked jeers. Inside the hearing room, she sat stiffly, her lawyers at her side, but her mind elsewhere. Because in the front row, nestled between her parents, sat Emily. The girl's presence sent a tremor through Victoria's heart. The room blurred around her. For a moment, she wasn't a billionaire's wife or a queen of Boston. She was a frail child again, staring at her reflection in hospital windows, legs bound in braces. Hearing classmates whisper cripple as she passed. The shame, the rage, the vow to never be weak again, all of it surged back with crushing force. The prosecutor began, laying out the charges, the evidence, the scandals. But Victoria barely heard him. Her eyes locked on Emily's, who looked back with a quiet sadness rather than triumph. That expression was unbearable. It was not mockery, not victory, it was compassion. And it unraveled her more than any accusation could when the questioning began. Victoria tried to keep her mask intact, answering in clipped, rehearsed tones. But the pressure mounted. Documents were presented. Witnesses spoke. Each fact was a hammer breaking down her walls. And then came the question that split the air. Mrs. Hamilton, is it true you spent part of your childhood in a wheelchair? Gasps rippled through the room. Camera zoomed in. Victoria froze. Her lawyers shifted uncomfortably. The truth she had buried for decades stood at the threshold. Her lips parted, but no words came. She glanced at Emily again. The girl's eyes were steady, unblinking, not condemning, inviting. The silence stretched, heavy and electric. And in that moment, Victoria Hamilton, the woman everyone feared, felt her empire teetering on the edge of collapse. But what the world didn't yet know was that the shocking truth of her past was even darker than a childhood illness. There was much more hidden behind the polished doors of her history. And soon, it would come crashing into the light. The courthouse was silent, the kind of silence that weighs heavier than thunder. Victoria Hamilton, once the queen of Boston's elite, sat at the witness table, her diamond-hard mask crumbling. The prosecutor's question still hung in the air like a blade. Mrs. Hamilton, is it true you spent part of your childhood in a wheelchair? The crowd leaned forward, hungry for blood. But what they received instead was something no one expected. Victoria's lips trembled. For the first time in decades, she allowed herself to whisper words she had sworn she'd never speak in public. Yes. She breathed, her voice cracking. Cameras flashed, pens scratched furiously across notepads. The city gasped, but she wasn't finished. I wasn't just in a wheelchair, she continued, her hands gripping the wood of the table until her knuckles turned white. I was born with a degenerative spinal condition. I spent years trapped in braces, mocked, pitied, called names I won't repeat. My father left. My mother worked herself to the bone just to afford my surgeries. The world looked at me and saw weakness, and I swore. Her voice broke, and for the first time tears streaked down her perfect face. I swore no one would ever see me like that again. The room shifted. Whispers rippled through the crowd, not of scorn, but of shock. Reporters who had sharpened their knives hesitated. Even the prosecutor faltered for a moment, caught off guard by her sudden vulnerability. But Victoria wasn't confessing out of strategy. She was unraveling. I built walls, she said, her words spilling out faster, as if a dam had broken. Every cruel word I said, every person I crushed, it wasn't strength. It was fear. Fear that the frail girl in the braces was still inside me. And when that child in the restaurant looked at me with those eyes, her gaze flickered toward the front row, where Emily sat frozen in her wheelchair. She reminded me of myself, the self I buried, the self I hated. Emily's eyes welled with tears. But she didn't look away. She saw something no one else did. The truth trembling behind Victoria's collapse. The prosecutor cleared his throat, regaining control. So you admit to hiding your past, Mrs. Hamilton. But what about the financial misconduct of your foundation? The spell threatened to shatter, but Victoria leaned forward, her voice sharper now, though still raw. Yes, I signed the papers. I approved the transfers. But do you think I cared about the money? No, I cared about control, about never feeling powerless again. She slammed her hand on the table, startling the room. And yet here I am, powerless, brought to my knees not by you. She glared at the prosecutor, but by her. She pointed at Emily. Gasps filled the chamber. The camera swung toward the girl in the chair, who shrank slightly under the sudden storm of attention. But Victoria's voice softened, trembling with something unfamiliar. She showed me what true power is. It isn't diamonds or fear. It's courage. It's speaking truth when your voice shakes. It's refusing to bow even when the world says you should. She did what I couldn't. She was honest. The room was still. Some people wept quietly. Others stared, unable to reconcile the tyrant they once feared with the broken woman confessing before them. Emily's small voice rose in the silence. You don't have to hate the girl in the braces. You can be kind to her now. Every head turned. The words, spoken with the simple wisdom of an 8-year-old, cut through the noise more cleanly than any judge's gavel. Victoria's composure shattered. She covered her face with trembling hands, sobs racking her body. Years of rage, of arrogance, of cruelty, all of it was nothing but armor hiding the wound of a little girl who had never healed. In that moment, Boston didn't see a queen brought low, they saw a human being finally exposed. The prosecutor pressed forward with the case, and the hearing continued, but the focus had shifted. The story wasn't just about fraud anymore. It was about a woman undone by the truth she had buried, and a child who had forced her to confront it died in the weeks that followed. Victoria's empire collapsed. She stepped down from the foundation, luxury penthouses were sold, assets seized. Lawyers negotiated settlements. She went from untouchable to ordinary in a matter of days. But for the first time, she no longer resisted. She let it fall, and in a twist no one expected, she reached out not to her allies, not to her lawyers, but to the Millers. One morning, Sarah opened the door to find Victoria standing there, stripped of glamour, her hair tied back, her eyes swollen from sleepless nights. She looked nothing like the woman at Luminous. "May I speak to your daughter?" she asked. Her voice barely more than a whisper. Emily wheeled herself forward. There was no fear in her gaze, only curiosity. Victoria actually knelt on the worn welcome mat, lowering herself until she was eye level with the child who had broken her. Tears welled again as she whispered, "I'm sorry." Emily reached out, placing her small hand on Victoria's. "Then don't be the scary queen anymore. Be the girl in the braces. She deserves kindness too." It was the simplest of offerings, but it was everything for the city. The scandal became a cautionary tale. A woman who built her throne on fear, toppled by the innocence of a child. But for Victoria, it was something more. It was the first step toward healing a wound she had carried all her life. And for Emily, it was proof that even the most powerful can change. If someone dares to tell them the truth, the Queen of Boston was gone. In her place was a woman learning, for the first time, what it meant to be human,